Ah yes, the Ninja Turtles.
Pizza power!
The awesome foursome that need no introduction, but due to the nature of my videos, I'm gonna give them one anyway. Written under the influence of what I'm assuming is methamphetamine, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles hit comic book shelves in May of 1984. The story follows 4 reptilian siblings who, after being subjected to radioactive ooze, transform into street-talking pizza-loving mutants. They're raised and trained by Splinter, another victim of the ooze and former pet rat of a Japanese martial artist. They learn to fight crime, dress up like the Thing from Fantastic Four, and there's a cheese grater or something. I don't know, man. The idea was brought together by former comic book creating duo Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, who produced the comics themselves under their independent company, Mirage Studios. Surprisingly, the comic was a hit, which then led to a TV show that was a bigger hit, and would of course lead to a feature film which would not only become an even bigger hit, but it would also become the highest grossing independent movie at that point in time, which you might not know is actually pretty class. So if we were to look at the franchise retrospectively, you can see that it's accomplished something that not many properties have been able to replicate. I mean, think about it. There hasn't been an instance where the Turtles have completely faded away, because usually, when a parent wants to introduce their child to a show they watched when they were younger, it's either met with confusion or just lack of interest. Because the majority of times, when shows are brought back for a younger generation, they're either insultingly different or extremely short-lived. But this doesn't seem to be the case with the Turtles. The franchise has been able to pump out multiple shows, movies, games, toys, and a bunch of other useless stuff, to the point where both myself and my 2 siblings were able to grow up with 3 completely different incarnations of the Turtles. I mean, I know this doesn't exactly speak for the entire fanbase, or even the franchise itself, but I thought it was interesting, so yeah. But really, what is it about the Turtles that makes them so approachable for different generations to pick up? And why have they stuck around this long? Is it the personality of the Turtles themselves? Well, yeah, probably. Each Turtle has a very distinct and also very exaggerated trope that divides them from the others. First off, you got Leonardo, the leader and, in a sense, the straight man of the group.
Next!
You got Donatello, the quick-witted brains of the bunch who does machines. And, if you've been on this site for more than 15 years, you've probably heard every AVGN ripoff make this joke about 50 times. After that, you have Raphael, who I'm pretty certain is the eventual love child of both Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro. And last, but certainly not least, we have Michelangelo, the Blue Prince, or should I say, the Orange Prince, for Pauly Shore. And if you don't know who Pauly Shore is, well, to be honest, I'm not really certain he remembers either, to be fair. But if you go for all that, and that doesn't tickle your fancy, you could just go with the classic 6-year-old excuse of, I like Michelangelo because he's got the nunchucks. No, cause I like Leonardo though because his mask is blue. But okay, you must be thinking, yeah sure, a good set of characters can either throw yourself into the timeless box, or the outdated void. But surely there must be a bit more substance to the show. A sort of level of quality that must be upkept upon every instance of the series, in order to keep the legacy of the franchise intact. Well, yeah, no, it's complicated. After the shock success of the Turtles' first motion picture, there was a looming question dangling over the heads of both fans, and most importantly, investors. And that was, what's next? Because when you have a thing like a comic book or a TV show, a big motion picture is usually your endgame. You get a big bunch of money from a whole lot of people you don't know, and you piece together a bigger and grander version of your vision, something that you couldn't achieve through the limitations of both television and print media. Now, I understand that funding was an issue with the original Turtles film. Like I said before, it was the highest grossing independent film of all time, so the budget wasn't as free-spirited as maybe, I don't fucking know, the Pound Puppies. But with the money they did have, they managed to not only make a respectable adaptation of the series, they also just went out and made an absolute joyride of an action film. They had kids running around stealing crates of cigarettes and arcade cabinets. You had Raphael shouting, "Damn!" On top of that, You had Splinter just being like, nah, you're alright mate, and flipping Shredder off a roof. Now, am I saying that the successful production and the ticket sales for the first film was the catalyst for the eventual downfall of the franchise's reputation? No. And if you're asking that, you're probably thinking, well, if that's not what you're saying, then what the f are you saying? Well, it comes down to the age-old concept of quality over quantity. Now, there are good components and bad components of a show reaching its peak. In a sense, it's good, because your favourite show is everywhere, giving you this limitless amount of opportunity to indulge in your desired fandom. But the downside to that would be that 90% of the products and content produced to cash in on your interests are cheaply slapped together dribble that are produced quick and thrown onto shop shelves even quicker. If they can get whatever they're shooting wrapped up in a day, it can be edited, shrink wrapped, and under your Christmas tree by winter. And where better to start off than the TMNT VHS trilogy.
Dig this, dude. I'm undercover, man.
Starting us off, we have the making of the Coming Out of Our Shells tour, which is then succeeded by TMNT Turtle Tunes, and then, fortunately, concluded in 1984 with We Wish You a Turtle Christmas. Now, the quality of these videos really do speak for themselves, so I don't really want to go all Doug Walker on you, but Jesus Christ, man. There's a reason why these films have gained a level of infamousy throughout the years, because any sort of integrity or grit that the franchise posed throughout its then 10-year lifespan had officially flown out the window. And I know the second film is miles more camp than the first one, and yes, I'm aware the third film exists, but come on man, Leonardo has a fucking rowboat.
Leonardo had a rowboat. This is making me sick.
But I don't think I'm in the dark here, as after years of the franchise financially poisoning itself, the Turtles took a drastically different tonal shift. Instead of being the wisecracking, free-loving crime fighters that they were dark and serious warriors of the night. So they say. The change started with the cartoon. Instead of putting forward a new series that would reimagine the tone that had already been established, the producers just said, nah, and just completely changed both the tone and the art style at the beginning of the 8th season. I mean, I kind of understand it. The Turtles had essentially became a laughingstock at that point, and with shows like Batman the Animated Series, Gargoyles, Street Sharks, which is basically just a cooler version of the Turtles because, you know, the sharks. So, yeah, it kinda just made sense. But come on man, did you have to design them to look so tired? Leonardo's looking knackered after his 12th consecutive night shift. But even with all that set and put into motion, this still wasn't helping the ratings. The decline of Saturday morning programming had become abundant since the dawn of the 90s, with the arrival of channels such as Cartoon Network and Nicktoons, who held the promise of broadcasting non-stop cartoons 24/7 365. There was no real need to watch the Turtles at 9 when I could lie in and watch Dexter at 12. So, in 1996, after 9 long years on the air, CBS pulled the plug on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles during their 10th season, bringing a close to a series that would unintentionally rock a generation. Not in that way, you fucking twit. With one long-term business relationship coming to a close, unfortunately, so was another, as the paralleling partnership between Eastman and Laird had become extremely apparent. The two had directly opposite standpoints on where they believed the franchise would continue. On the left side, we had Laird, focusing on the financial aspect of the brand, and wanted the brothers to be accessible as possible to as many audiences. Whilst on the right, Eastman wanted the franchise to recapture some of that grit and creative risks that the original source material was filled with. He made this clear for a wide variety of concept art and character designs for a series of cancelled TMNT movie projects that were in the works between 1994 and 1995, some of which I can't show because my family shared these videos on Facebook. The strain was clear between the two, with the pair living in two completely different states, with little to no contact with each other. It was obvious that a departure was on the horizon, but that just depends on where the franchise would go next. I mean, the sky is the limit. What could be the big new Turtles project that will bring the boys back into the limelight?
Alright, I gotta leave.
Well, here it is. The straw that broke the camel's back. Or should I say, the sword that cracked the Turtles' shell.
Boo! You stink!
Ninja Turtles' next mutation is kinda just unfortunate to say the least. The series was rightfully dead on arrival, I'm assuming they were trying to forge together a cheap and short-term variant of the live-action films, while also cashing in on the whole Power Rangers buzz that was floating about around this time. I say assuming because I generally can't think of a reason why this was actually approved by the network. Maybe it's like one of those haircut situations where you know it looks awful and you know you're gonna get the piss taken out of you when you get home, but when the barber comes up to you and asks what you think, you just go, yeah, it's sound mate, cheers for that. I think the public's biggest strife seems to lie with the show's inclusion of the new and 5th member of the Ninja Turtles, Venus. Now, other than the fact that she looks disgusting, Venus didn't really bother me as a kid. If anything, I was just happy that they were adding more turtles to the series, but I can see where the frustration stems from. The inclusion of Venus's character does seem a little spoon-fed. Her presence doesn't really add anything to the series. It just ticks a box, and gives the show a gimmick that the other shows didn't have. Personally, I believe that if the studio wanted to bring something new to the table, I know for a fact that they could have thought of something way better. On top of the fact that they abandoned one of the most iconic and well-written female characters, just so they could pigeonhole one that has ceramic turtle tits. But on the business side of things, after years of being on the fence, this was the final hurdle that pushed Kevin Eastman over the edge. He had already played with the idea of introducing a 5th turtle many times throughout the 90s. However, Venus was such a strong divert from what he originally envisioned for the franchise, causing him to finally throw in the towel, selling off the remainder of his rights to the franchise over to Peter Laird, ending his 16-year chapter with the brothers to focus his passions elsewhere. Regardless of Eastman being on or off board, Next Mutation was still a sinking ship, one that didn't take long to fade into obscurity after its cancellation in 1998.
Hey, thanks guys. That was a close one.
So, where did the Turtles go from there? Well, other than a few limited comic runs, the franchise seems to have taken a halt for the remainder of the 20th century, but this did seem like a premeditated attempt to make sure that the next big project brought forward could land with ease, instead of falling flat in its face. There were many concepts, some further into production than others, some of which were being produced and broadcast by Hallmark, which to me just sounds like you're screaming, liquidate my funds now please. You see, the issue with Turtles in the 90s was that it was such a fast moving entity. Everything was being produced and manufactured and thrown onto people's screens so fast, audiences were bored. And I think they'd really just had enough of being let down by someone who had shaped their childhood. But I think that's really where the pause helped. You see, I've grew up with the Ninja Turtles. I've grew up with them since, I don't know, as long as I can remember. But I have to admit, my first exposure to the Ninja Turtles was the 2003 cartoon. Not just because it was on TV, and not just because the Turtles were everywhere, but it was because it had this cool style to it, and this passion that you only really saw in the comics. I absolutely just fell in love with it when I was a kid, and I kind of understand it now. They were able to recreate something that they had failed to do multiple times over the span of a decade. It kind of just shows that you can hit rock bottom, but you can always pick yourself back up with time, even if you do think your time's past. I'm the nostalgia critic. I remember it, so you don't.
Jam this jam, you feel so good.